Thank you for making the time for us. And what we've got here behind me, which you can't see, are some design and media production technology students who I use you as an example in this class all the time. You know, you have this top-notch
What not
website.
to do, right?
And I got to tell you, back in graduate school 12 some years ago, you said to me, how much money do you want to make next year? And I said something like $60,000. You said, that's crazy. I asked you to imagine something. Why didn't you say $10 million? And that was like inspirational to me. And it stuck with me ever since then. And I think that you've kind of demonstrated that, you know, get it attitude that I've seen with your commercial work and success and all of that. And so I just wanted to offer some of your insights to these folks here about photography and obstacles or, you know, tips to get started. I think all of these people are doing business in one way or another. And so any of those kind of business side insights you have too would be real helpful. So tell us a little about what you do.
So I think what's interesting is that statement that you just made. I didn't remember how long ago I had that thought process, but a lot of the way that I think and have thought was always about like kind of rooting things in my imagination of like dreaming and then figuring out like a practical application on how to move forward with it. So usually when I had conversations with people or even with myself, everything was rooted in what I've kind of fixated on to be reality, which was, well, how much do you want to make? In that situation, you said 60. I mean, most people, if you ask them, I mean, as opposed to the younger generation, I feel like the younger generation is more imaginative with their numbers as opposed to like the older generation that's a bit more practical. So 60,000 sounded realistic, or even 100,000 sounded ambitious for many people. But that's kind of where everything started for me. So what I first did was try to imagine what I wanted to do. And then I tried to make practical steps to figure out how to execute those things. So a lot of my work kind of rooted in looking at my camera as a tool to solve a problem and then trying to figure out how to envision it as something more than just solving a problem, like creating opportunities or scaling up somebody's vision, if it's theirs or my own. And most of my work is kind of turned into that by doing commercial work. I found out that I was able to use something that I enjoy doing, being photography, and then creating a career out of it. And I mean, it sounds romantic in its current existence, but the reality was I was doing a lot of pictures of a lot of very boring things. Arguably, some of those things are still existent now, but it was really just kind of plotting out a plan or a strategy and then trying to take steps gradually to make that progress. It's interesting that you point out my social media because I actually want to, this is somewhat of like a hot take, if you will, because I haven't talked to anybody about this. This is something that actually I talked to like a small circle that I have. So for social media right now, I don't know if any of you even follow me on social. I'm not suggesting you do or don't, but if you'll notice for this year, 2024 specifically, I've been very avid about posting and providing information about photography. Some of it I consider to be a bit more professional level. Some of it is just kind of like general knowledge, but the goal is to stay consistent with it. And the reality is it's a case study. So on the surface, the goal is me creating content, generating attention or followers or engagement or impressions or however you want to KPI it out. But the reality is I'm using it as a case study because what I want to do is package it up and then offer it as an additional service to my future clients. So like if I'm able to make sense of social media and how to navigate it and how to leverage it and how to make sense of it, then it's an additional service. So I can take your pictures and I can help you strategize on how to create the content. But now I can talk about how to package that content so it has the strongest impact and how long it's going to take for you to make that content and post it on these different platforms to get the level of engagement you need for it to transition into sales, right? So you could imagine that for me, having done this now for like whatever 10 or 15 years, the biggest value I can have is adding value to my clients, right? Like it's easy to say you take pictures, but can you design as well? For example, one of the things that I learned early on was if you wanted to do stuff for magazines or editorials, you would be better off creating an entire completed thought. So shooting the pictures, even having a story written about the editorial, the fashion spread, or what have you, and putting that completed thought to a magazine, as opposed to just reaching out to a magazine and saying that you're available to take pictures if they need it. because you're showing that you have the continued vision in mind.
I want to stop you because I kind of spent my career kind of split, right? My entire training, entire background is photographer, right? Art school, everything. But I got out of there, and that I like that you said, tell the whole story, right? It's a complete package because I ended up as the graphic designer. I ended up as the creative on staff. I ended up providing guidance for CEOs. I ended up providing guidance for web development companies. And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how you, right? You said you started simple photography. Here's a picture.
Right.
How did you kind of like get? I mean, that's a lot of stuff, right? You said KPI. Do y'all know what KPI is? Key performance indicator. It's a number that you try to reach.
Right.
I need 100 new clients this year, or I need to see some percentage on my web analytics. So you've
Right.
put together all these business skills in addition to your creative skills, but they're really like storytelling, right? Is kind of what you're doing, and you're the, I don't know, the master of media, right? You kind of have to pull all those little parts in. I got to a point where I just couldn't do all of that stuff. Do you have other people doing it? You doing it all on your own?
So I lean into the things that I enjoy. Like, so I enjoy business. I enjoy making sense of, I enjoy dissecting. Like I'll say it like this. So for example, with the social media thing, I tried to do this with social media a few years ago, but it was all self-beneficial. Like I was doing it because I was trying to grow my following for myself. So I was making content that I really didn't care about. I was making content that I felt like people would care about, but wasn't relevant to me. And I burnt myself out. So what I've learned is that I want to delve into the things that I'm personally passionate about. And one of my pillars, if you will, is professional development, right? I think that there's opportunities for people to get in the room, but ultimately you'll find out that they'll get into the room and they don't have the skill set that's necessary to stay in the room. So when I started to tap into that aspect of it, I'm fine with not having a skill. Like I'm not a graphic designer. I can't. I've tried and it looks terrible every time, but I know it's needed. So what I've done is if I know that the need is there, I can find the resource to provide that. I just need to be able to communicate to my client what the entire scope or entire vision is. And I can give them a completed thought, even if it doesn't have to come at my own hands. Like the biggest mistake you can make, the biggest mistake you can make in this business or any business, in my opinion, is thinking as an entrepreneur or as a self-employed individual that if something has to get done, you're the only person that can do it. That will kill you every time. If you feel like the only way something can get done is if you yourself have to do it, you'll burn yourself out. You'll lose out on opportunities. And I could rattle off like 4 or 5 jobs where I was so proud of the fact that I had my hand on every aspect of it. And now 7 or 8 years removed from those situations, I'm like, man, if I had got somebody that was better at lighting, if I got somebody that was better at retouching, if I got somebody that was better at some aspect of it, it would have just made the final product that much better. And I still would have benefited. But because I was under this impression that everything that had to get done by me, I basically came into situations with a lackluster skill set and thought that that was enough to show up. And in actuality, having the vision, having the idea is the first part. And then being honest with yourself and understanding what you don't have or what you don't know and pulling in the proper resources to get you over that hump. And in the process of me doing that, I mean, even with video, I didn't know anything about video. I went to school for photography, right? I mean, I got my undergraduate degree in computer science, but as it relates to grad school at SCAD, I got my degree in photography. So then clients would ask me about video work, and I had 2 options. I could say, no, I can't do it. And then they could find somebody that could, or I could say I could do it and acknowledge that I don't have the skill set, but I know people that could and make them or bring them in under my umbrella and be able to execute this task based off of what the client needed. So it's a duality thing. It's not necessarily you just have to have all the skills to be able to do the thing, but you do need to be able to see a completed thought, a completed story, a completed narrative so that you can figure out what pieces or elements are involved and figure out like, all right, I have 1 through 5, but I need somebody else to help with 5 through 10 because the client still will appreciate the fact that you're able to get the job done. It's not so much a concern if you physically could do it yourself.
That's that's something I've told people is when people hire you, when a magazine or whoever hires you, they want you to solve a problem for them. They don't want to have to solve problems for you.
Right.
And a lot of times they do, right? All of our media is connected now. So they expect the photographer to know video or have a connection or
Right.
have a plan, right? Do what you love, but have a plan for everything else. Maybe you could talk about that connection, right? How do you find those people? Is that just a natural course of working? Yeah,
I mean,
go ahead.
there is some magic to the sentiment, like if you build it, they will come, right? So the more kind of layman's terms way to put it is nobody hires you to do something they've never seen you do, right? And what I typically have a conversation with younger creatives about is your portfolio, your website, your professional presentation is like an amalgamation of all the time you have, all the effort you have, unlimited resources, so to speak, right? If that is lackluster, I don't mean the work has to be great, but if you don't have it presented in a way that would make me confident that I'm going to give you a finite amount of time and a finite amount of resources to execute my vision. Now, you've had as much time as you needed to execute your vision. You've had as much time as you needed to design your website, to lay out your portfolio, to come up with these creative concepts. If that stuff isn't done, and now I'm going to now tell you I need something done in a week, and I'm going to give you a specific amount of money to do it, it would leave me with less confidence in your ability to execute my thing if you couldn't execute your thing. So what I initially started to do was make sure that just on a basic level, all the regular stuff was taken care of. My email address was right. My website was correct. I had points of contact, a means of being able to contact me. I had work on my website that I felt like accurately reflected my skill set. So it wasn't a situation where I was leaving work up from years ago that I was better than just because I needed it to kind of gap fill. I wanted to refresh my imagery, stay current, stay relevant, so that the people that were looking, if they stumbled across my work, they would find work that I felt like best reflected where I was. They would know how to contact me, and then I would have all of the updated materials that were necessary to validate my claims of being a professional. Then from there, I started to do all of the regular stuff. I was going to events, and I was going to expos and things that would align with the type of photography I wanted. So for example, the easiest examples that most people use is wedding photographers. If you aspired to be a wedding photographer or anything that dealt with weddings, then you might want to look into different types of bridal expos that transpire. You might want to find different bridal shops that will allow you to leave business cards or promo cards behind. You would do things that would put you in the line of traffic of the people that could benefit from your service. So like once I had the foundational things taken care of, and I'm still consistently trying to refresh those things so that they stay as current and as in alignment with my skill set, I'm then looking for environments that align to the type of work I want to be hired to do. And then I'm putting my stuff in those places. I mean, usually the rule of thumb was like, you want to try to have your images show up in front of the same person 5 to 7 times. So social media is the low-hanging fruit, right? But I mean, LinkedIn is another form of social media that some people that are in the creative field typically don't consider, but it's extremely important. Doing editorials or trying to get into publications because it's another touch point for you to be able to get in front of people. Being able to do things like this, for example, right, where you're speaking to people that have different backgrounds or different skill sets or in different arenas. You're trying to make sure that you show up. And this translates into fine art, right? When I was in grad school, they would tell you to try to submit your work into almost every art show you possibly could. And it wasn't because the expectation was for you to get in every art show or to be accepted by every juried show, but it was because you wanted to get as many eyeballs on your work as possible. So to some degree or another, it's about the proper presentation, having the work in the right places, and then like making sure you stay current.
Yeah, you talked about your portfolio and stuff and things like that, and that's sort of what I've been talking to these folks about recently. So, where did you start? Right, we were in graduate school. You did the work. I think Arnika picked it up.
The fine art side.
Do what?
You mean like the fine art side?
Well, there's the fine art side, but my question is really going to be, how did you get into your commercial work? Like, because you have a super consistent, like you've chosen your audience. You've chosen your kind of work. You have 3 or 4 super tight bodies of, beauty portraits, etc. Right. How did you come to, or describe to me your first pitch meeting? Like, who did you go to?
So it started off with me wanting to do fashion work, right? So I wanted to do fashion photography, but when I was doing different types of editorials or small projects here in Atlanta, I would go into other markets. I'm from New York, so I'd go home to see my mom, and I would try to go to modeling agencies to test with their models, or reaching out to different editorial publications to see if I could introduce myself as for consideration. And my fashion work didn't align with the aesthetic that they had in mind. And what I was finding was that in Atlanta, there weren't the proper, and this was years ago, but there weren't the types of showrooms or the types of fashion houses that you could pull from that would have like mass appeal to the markets that really kind of define fashion. Like, it was hard for me to leave Atlanta and go to New York and then show fashion work in New York when New York was considered the fashion mecca, right? So then I started to do more beauty work because it allowed me to kind of get rid of the clothing that may not work and focus on the hair or the cosmetics or like the tighter shot, bust line up, basically. So what I started to do is literally create work that I felt like reflected like a hair campaign. So I would test with models. I would reach out to modeling agencies. I'd find hairstylists. I'd find makeup artists, and I would bring us all together. I'd tear a picture out of a magazine and say, let's try to create a better version of this. And as I created more images like that, then I would take maybe 5 to 7 of those images and put them on like a promo card of sorts. And then I would find hair companies that were local to Atlanta and just introduce myself and say, hey, my name is Allen. I'd love to work with you. And I also was very honest with myself. I knew when I sucked. I know when I still suck now. I wasn't going to the most popular multi-billion-dollar companies fresh out saying, yo, I'm the best thing since sliced bread, hit me up. I was going to the smaller companies, like the ones that most people didn't know about, because I was using those as like a proof of concept, so to speak. If this company would use me, then perhaps another company that was slightly above that company, and another company that was slightly above that company. And I literally just kind of walked my way up. Same thing with magazines. I shot the quarter page in the back of the magazine, and then it turned into a half page, and then it turned into a full page, and then it turned into a cover. And I mean, that's not like, I mean, it's anecdotal because it's my experience, but it's not something I'm saying in the context of just making it up. I literally shot the smallest piece of the magazine, and they hired me again to shoot a half a page. Then they hired me again to shoot a full page. Then when they hired me to shoot the cover, I would then leverage that cover to go to other magazines and do the same thing over again, because the bigger magazines saw the cover from the smaller magazine, and that didn't mean they would give me a cover. They'd give me another quarter page or half page, and then I would just kind of grow up from there. So the pitching aspect for the commercial work is something that didn't come until I had a few more companies under my belt, because then I could go to companies and say that, look, these are your competitors, and I'm able to do things that those competitors could benefit from. I'm sure I could hear what you all are intending on doing. Like I said before, like, what are some of your indicators on like what would actually be successful for you? And I can make a prescription on a campaign, or I'll even say I have an idea that I think would work well for your brand. I'd love to come and introduce that idea to you. And it was just something that kind of got massaged. I mean, the idea of pitching at a higher level is a little bit more difficult. Like when you start to get to budgets that are $100,000 or $150,000 or $200,000, it's a little bit more difficult for you to just pitch a cold idea. Usually with those situations, they will give you what's called a brief, and then you'll take that brief and then cultivate it into a pitch, but it'll still kind of have the tenets of what they needed in there. But early on, I was making up ideas in my head and then reaching out to companies and seeing if they'd be interested in me creating this for their company.
So that's like creativity. I imagine that, art school came in probably pretty handy there, thinking of stuff. But it sounds like what you did was created a body of work, 7 or 8 images that you felt were really solid and were doing what you wanted them to do. And then you just walked in the door somewhere or called them up or sent somebody an email and said, I'm a photographer. I can do this for you. And then you just rolled everything into the next thing, right?
Right.
You had 7 originals, then you did a little work. You use that work to go to the next place and just build.
Because the philosophy that I had and still have is, if what you can do for them is more beneficial than what they can do for you, it makes the conversation that much easier. Usually what ends up happening is, if you're newer to this, you're going to be like, hey, I'm new and I'm really hungry. Give me a chance. And all of that says that they're doing something for you that benefits you, right? They're hoping that maybe out of this relationship, they get something out of it. But ultimately, you're asking them to take a chance on you because you need the opportunity. If you can change that dynamic and show to that potential client or customer or person that what you're going to do for them is more valuable than the opportunity is for you, even if the opportunity is still more valuable to you, obviously. But if you can give them the impression that what you're going to do is more valuable to them, then it makes the like, so for example, for internships, 9 times out of 10, when somebody reaches out to me about an internship, they're like, I'll go get coffee and I'll sweep the floors and I'll take the garbage out, because the idea is that they're going to give me some value that is more valuable to me than being on set is for them. When in actuality, the benefit 9 times out of 10 for them is to be in the environment, but it doesn't cost me anything for them to be in the environment. So I reap benefit from them doing these various things that would offset them being there for me, right? That's the logic. That doesn't really work for me. I don't need you to take out the trash or go get coffee. Uber Eats took a lot of that away from a lot of people as far as going to get coffee is concerned. So it really translates into a scenario where I'm looking for somebody that can legitimately add value when they're on set. And I think that companies and clients and brands are looking for the same thing. So that's the reason why being more than a photographer is advantageous, because if you can complete a thought and you actually are able to do something that's called like provide a turnkey operation, the companies say, all right, well, we have less people to have to look for. We have less things or resources we have to pull to the table. We can reach out to you and you can do everything for us. And from a business standpoint, that provides you with more money, but subsequently it also provides you with a bit more stress as well. But it gives you a little bit more creative freedom when you are bringing in all the resources.
That's I've been telling them, there's a lot more to being a photographer than the kind of like, I can make a picture. It's the soft skills, right? Talking to people, working with people, making people believe in you, looking credible, being committed. Right. I've got some of your portraits up from your site here. And this seems like personal work. I think I recognize the kid in the band uniform. Are you still doing personal work?
100%.
How do you break that down?
So, I mean, I'm this that we're looking at now is a mix. Really, I just was doing portraits or like more traditional, like kind of polished portraits of people. Most of my work is beauty work. So as you can imagine, like I said, I do a lot of stuff in the beauty space. So what I needed to do is create a body of work that showed that I was able to still take portraits in a more traditional sense. So some of that is fine arty, if you will, and then some of that is still like a commercial style portrait. So these images kind of mix between the two. With my personal work still bounces between a bunch of different subject matters. Sometimes I'm doing personal work with the intention of having that be leveraged for the commercial sector. And then sometimes I'm doing personal work that I just contextualize as fine artwork. And what that does on a professional level, on a business level, is showing my clients that I have range, right? So my personal work is obviously personal. So it's for me, right? I don't care if anybody doesn't like it. It's nice that they do, but I'm satisfied as long as I'm satisfied. But being able to show some of that work gives my clients the opportunity to understand that the beauty work or the commercial work isn't the complete thought as it relates to what I'm capable of, but I am able to execute against a brief, but I'm also able to tap into something else that I feel like is a bit more intimate or more, like I said, personal. So I'm always doing personal work, but like right now I'm doing a personal project, but it's still beauty related, but it's a bit more abstract than a commercial client would want. So I'm doing that for a few different reasons, because I want to be able to challenge my clients on being able to think bigger and have more conceptualized ideas. But I first need to do it with my own work so that I can show what that looks like, because you'll learn very quickly in this business that most companies want these kind of out of the box thoughts. But by the time it gets to execution, it gets like watered down and diluted. So it's digestible to the vast majority of people.
That's great. So, right, keep working, never stop. Try something different, but because these portraits are definitely different than your beauty work, but they're not the same, right? Yeah. They don't look like your beauty pictures, but I can tell the same person made them.
Right. And that really matters, right? So if I were to, I'm trying to like, if I were to take pictures that were grotesque or like dark and like, I don't know, I don't want to go too far out the way, but if I were to create images that were just totally left, right? I think that you could contextualize those and say that's your personal work, but I 100% think that your customers, your clients, the companies you want to work with will factor that in, even if the work that they're going to ask you to do is drastically different than your personal work. So I'm still cautious or conscious of the fact that like the personal work that I'm showing on my website still has an effect on how people perceive the commercial work that they may be asking me to do.
Right. You have a way that you want them to fit together.
Right.
Right.
Because there's work that I've taken that I really love that I just would never put on my website. And it's nothing crazy. Like I've done a few different personal projects of my daughters, of my wife, of family that I just wouldn't show. Like we just, I've printed them out. I've framed some of them, but I wouldn't put it on my website, for example.
Yeah. Same.
And that goes for the commercial work as well. I've done campaigns that featured children, right? Like, so we've done hair campaigns or clothing campaigns for kids, and I just don't want to be hired to do that, so I just don't show it on my website.
Okay, yeah. I've been telling, like, don't show anybody anything that you don't want them to see.
Because that's the first thing that they will, for some reason, it's like the way that the universe works is that if you don't want them to see it, that's the first thing they will see.
That's true. And I saw your flowers even that you were doing for a while. They still had that beautiful lighting that you do. And so what are the flowers about?
So the actual portraits, it's funny because the series is about an ex-girlfriend, and I have now been married for 6 years. So it's always a little weird thing, right? But the series is called Courtney, a visual depiction of a love I don't completely understand. And it was really, the idea was if you buy somebody flowers or you buy the person you care about flowers, but to get those flowers, more often than not, you're buying them flowers that eventually have to die, very much like the relationship ends up having to die. So it's like if you never buy the flowers never have to be cut, so then they don't die, very much like if you never committed to the relationship in the first place, you don't have to worry about eventually losing it, right? So the fine art conversation only has to come up for the people that care about the fine art conversation, because you can appreciate the flowers just for the sake of them being flowers, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So that tends to exist within my fine art work. You can appreciate it for the sake of its existence, or if you want to understand why it exists, there is a different meaning or a meaning in general. And usually the only people that ask about that are other artists, as opposed to creatives that may find themselves not necessarily paying attention to that.
Uh-huh. Any of y'all have questions? I'm sure we'd like to hear from you.
Yeah. How do you stay creative and continue to push yourself as a photographer?
You hear that? How do you stay creative and push?
I don't know. It's not it. I just couldn't. I don't know another version of me. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying that everything I create is dope. I'm not saying everything I create I love, but I'm always creating, and I'm not even creating always intentionally. Like, it could be, it's my default. Does that make sense? Like, I've done this for so long, and I don't even mean like as a professional. I mean, when I was a kid, I was doing stuff that I was taking stuff apart and gluing it to stuff and calling it art when it was really me just like ruining the television control. You know what I mean? Like, it was who I was at my core, just to try to create. So I don't necessarily. I think if anything, the question for me is, how do I stay inspired? And that is a struggle, like to be inspired to want to, or being compelled to want to create a specific thing. But the desire to create is always there. And it's not something I have to like will myself to do, as much as perhaps I have to find something to tap into so that it's actually meaningful to me when I'm done with it.
So these folks are at various stages at the beginning of their careers. What do you wish you had known when you walked out the door and said, I'm going to go be a successful photographer?
I love that. I'm going to shift that a bit, right? So I don't know if you remember, but you and Steve from SCAD, at the time I was in school, you guys were talking about these things that I didn't care about called podcasts, right? And it was such an important thing. We went through this whole process of setting up podcasts, and I went through the motions because there was a grade attached to it, but I didn't care, right? Like it. And now, literally like a million years later, just the thought that if I had stayed committed to that all the way from then until now, the level of like knowledge I'd have around podcasts would be a whole nother business platform, right? So now I'm stumbling my way through trying to figure out RSS feeds and all the stuff that you guys were talking about a million years ago casually, right? And I'm like, oh, my podcast needs to connect on the website. It needs to feed to Spotify. And it's like, these are things that we were talking about. And the reason why that matters is because I'm sure in class, you guys are talking about something that has no relevance to your current state, right? Like it'll be something that seems like it's innocuous, but if I had paid a bit more attention to some of those things and figured out how to integrate them into my workflow, into my business, and I mean, honestly, if I had known that some of these things were going to develop the way that they are, one thing I think is extremely important, for example, is AI, right? I feel like as artists, there's a fear around what AI is going to do, and it's real, right? I'm witnessing it happen, and I'm personally terrified by it. But there are some aspects of AI that we should absolutely be implementing into our business now, right? Like, even if you suck at writing content or writing copy, there's things to help you with AI. If you suck at making mood boards or coming up with ways to kind of display the ideas you have, there's AI that can help with that now, right? Like there are so many kind of small tools that, like, for example, when I post stuff on Instagram that requires you to say something in the comments and then it'll respond to you, there's platforms that are able to do that, right? And you can create a whole database of questions and answers that will allow an AI bot to have a conversation with somebody in their DMs, and it'll answer based off of information that I've loaded in. That it's so much, it adds so much value for me because I'm a team of one, right? So I end up having to be spread thin. And then if I'm trying to grow my audience in any capacity, for me to try to like field a scaling business. So maybe it was 3 people this week, but next week it might be 100 people. How do I respond to them within that same time frame that the 3 people got? And I think that things like AI are going to help with that. I mean, on the opposite side, as far as the creative is concerned, I'm hoping that the government or the country or whomever figures out how to navigate that so that we're not just kind of like cannibalized, but that's a conversation for another day.
You know, I talk about the AI, you know, I think that writing is one of the most important skills that we don't practice enough, because you got to be able to express your ideas, right? Create a complete story. And so, you know, that's something that I try to push. Is there another skill that they need to learn? Is like dive into Photoshop, dive into lighting, dive into design?
For me, as an actual photographer first, like understanding the technical aspects of my business are extremely important, right? So I care about lighting. I care about like the technical components of photography. Like I care about composition and structure. The thing that you're going to find out as you progress in this space is that you're going to run into people that are probably as diverse as this classroom is. And you need to be able to talk a little bit about all of those things, but there needs to be an area that you are like proficient in, right? So I can talk about design. I can talk about copywriting. I can talk about like certain, but if you want to talk to me about photography, that's where you know that I know my stuff. So whatever your thing is, you need to know it thoroughly, but you should kind of pepper in some of these other things. And even if it's something that you're not personally invested in, becoming familiar with it in a way that you can speak about it in a general manner, or literally the strongest skill set you can cultivate is the ability to talk and to listen. I mean, I guess listen more than talk, but being able to communicate effectively, making eye contact, using full sentences, some of the most fundamentals, because I'm sure I'm much older than most of you in the classroom, but I used to be the youngest in the room, and I always used to say that I'm talking to dinosaurs. And when I said that because even though I was young, I still needed to understand how they interpreted things. So me being able to communicate in a manner that I felt like was the language that they wanted to hear allowed me to get into those rooms and stay into those rooms. But yes, Photoshop, Lightroom, Capture One, Adobe Premiere, DaVinci Resolve, all of the suites and programs, I mean, are extremely important. But understanding social media, as much as I hate to have to say that, is extremely important as well, because if you're going to do this on a commercial level, there's no company that you're going to want to work with that doesn't need to leverage social media, and you can't be casual about it. You can't be anti-social media. I mean, if you all you'll see if you go on my Instagram, I don't post pictures of myself because it's not a personal thing for me. I look at it as a business. I'm looking at my social platform as a means of leveraging the knowledge that I get on there to help better suit me for conversations with companies. So like that would probably be the biggest thing that you have to embrace if you're not already.
Well, I think we've already kept you for 40 minutes. Thank you. It's really great. You think was this helpful for everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Alan. Maybe I'll correspond with you a little bit following. This has been a really helpful interview. And I guess we'll let you go and, best to your family. And thanks very much.
Thank you. Well, thank you all. Feel free to hit me up if you need anything else.
All right. AllenCooley.com. Bye-bye. Thank you.